The chandeliers of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Great Hall dripped light like liquid diamonds, casting a cold, brilliant glow on the sea of black ties and couture gowns. This was the Metropolitan Innovators Gala, the apex predator of New York City's charity circuit. An event where reputation was not merely currency, but the very air one breathed. The low hum of forced pleasantries and the clinking of champagne flutes formed a delicate symphony of power. A sound Elena Vance knew as well as the sharp, clean lines of her own architectural designs. Tonight, that sound was for her. She sat at the head table, a portrait of serene composure in a midnight blue gown that fell around her like frozen water. The fabric was a statement simple, structural, and utterly defiant of the frills and sequins that surrounded her. Her dark hair was pulled back into a severe but elegant chignon, revealing the clean, determined lines of her jaw. Before her, a legion of cameras flashed, their strobing lights creating a stuttering, unreal tableau of the city's elite. They were here to witness her coronation, the Vanguard Award, a Lifetime Achievement Prize for Architectural Vision, was the culmination of 2 decades of relentless work, of transforming the city's skyline with buildings that were not just structures, but arguments carved in steel and glass. The president of the museum concluded his remarks, and a polite, rustling wave of applause moved through the hall. "And now," he announced, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space, "to present the Vanguard Award to Ms. Elena Vance. I'd like to welcome a true titan of industry, a man whose own vision has shaped so much of our great city, the primary sponsor of this evening's gala, Mr. Marcus Thorne." The applause swelled, louder this time, more genuine. Marcus rose from his seat beside Elena, a vision of tailored perfection in a Brioni tuxedo. He was handsome in the way of old money and ruthless ambition's sharp gray eyes, a confident, predatory smile, and a mane of silver hair that spoke of distinguished authority, not age. He gave Elena's shoulder a proprietary squeeze, a gesture that looked avuncular to the room, but felt like a brand on her skin. She smiled, a perfect, placid smile she had practiced for years in the mirror. It did not reach her eyes. He strode to the podium, basking in the adoration of the crowd. He was a master of these rooms, a conductor of influence. As the founder and CEO of Thorne Consolidated, the largest real estate development firm on the East Coast, he didn't just build on the landscape, he owned it. "Thank you," Marcus began, his voice a smooth, resonant baritone that filled the hall. "It is a true honor to be here tonight, an honor to celebrate innovation, and an even greater honor to celebrate a true innovator, Elena Vance." He paused, turning to beam at her. The cameras swiveled, catching her gracious nod. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. "I've known Elena for a long time," Marcus continued, his tone becoming intimate, confidential. "Long before the magazine covers and the accolades. I remember a young woman with, let's call it raw talent, unfocused, full of chaotic, ambitious ideas that needed a steady hand to guide them." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the audience. They saw a mentor praising his protégé. Elena saw the first scalpel cut. He was framing her success as his creation, her genius as his refinement. She kept the smile fixed in place, a marble mask. "She has a unique gift. Our Elena," he said, leaning into the microphone. "A unique talent for acquiring assets others thought were secure. She can see the structural weaknesses in anything a blueprint, a business deal, a family legacy, and she knows exactly where to apply pressure. It's a formidable, if sometimes startling, skill." The coded language was exquisite in its cruelty. To the uninformed, he was praising her business acumen, To the handful of people in the room who knew their shared history, he was calling her a thief, a homewrecker. He was alluding to the bitter corporate battle years ago, where she had outmaneuvered him for the landmark Callaway Tower commission, a project he had considered his birthright. Her victory had been clean, strategic, and brilliant. He was now repainting it as something sordid. Her wineglass felt impossibly heavy in her hand. The scent of lilies from the centerpiece was cloying, suffocating. She focused on the architectural details of the hall, the soaring Romanesque arches, the coffered ceiling, grounding herself in the logic of form and function, a world away from the toxic swamp of Marcus's words. "But what I admire most about her," Marcus went on, his voice softening with faux sincerity, "is her resilience. To rise from such humble, even tragic, beginnings. It takes a certain kind of fortitude. We all have moments in our past, misjudgments we carry, but to overcome them, to build a glittering career on the foundations of what could have been a ruinous, tragic miscalculation. Well, that is the mark of a true survivor." A tragic miscalculation. The phrase struck her not like a scalpel, but like a sledgehammer. The glittering hall dissolved. The hum of the crowd faded into a roaring static. The scent of lilies was replaced by the smell of wet asphalt and gasoline. She was no longer in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She was 19 again, standing on the shoulder of a rain-slicked highway in upstate New York, the flashing red and blue lights of an ambulance painting the world in screaming, nightmarish strokes. The mangled steel of her beat-up sedan was wrapped around an ancient oak tree. The driver's side door was crushed inward, a metal fist clenched around an empty space. And in the passenger seat, she saw her brother, Leo. His face, usually so full of life and laughter, was pale and still, a light extinguished. He was 17, a brilliant, funny, impossible boy who was going to be a poet, a boy who had begged her to let him drive, just for a few miles on the empty back roads. But she had said no. She was the older sister. She was responsible. She had misjudged the curve, the slickness of the rain, the speed. A young Marcus Thorne, his face taut with shock, and something else, something cold and accusatory was there. In the other car, the one they had been following home from a weekend trip. He had been Leo's friend, or something adjacent to it. He was the one who pulled her from the wreckage. He was the one who had looked from the car to her and said, his voice a low, venomous whisper that cut through the wail of the sirens, "What did you do?" This was a catastrophic miscalculation. She had carried that phrase like a shard of glass in her heart for 20 years. A secret burden of guilt that had fueled every sleepless night, every impossible deadline, every ounce of ambition she possessed. She had built her entire life as a monument to precision, to control, to never, ever miscalculating again. And Marcus knew it. He had taken her most private, defining agony, and served it up as a charming anecdote for a room full of strangers. A hand touched her arm. It was the museum president, Elena. "They're waiting." She blinked, the great hall snapping back into focus. Marcus was standing by her chair, his hand outstretched, that benevolent smile plastered on his face. The entire room was on its feet, a standing ovation washing over her. The applause sounded like rainfall on a car roof. She placed her hand in his. His grip was cold and firm. He led her to the podium, the cameras flashing like a violent electrical storm. Her body moved with practiced grace. But inside, a tectonic shift had occurred. The guilt she had carried for 2 decades had finally, in the crucible of this public humiliation, transmuted into something else. It had hardened from a heavy, porous stone into a clean, sharp diamond. It had become rage. She took the heavy crystal award. It was cold and solid in her hands, an anchor in the storm. She stepped to the microphone, looked out at the blur of faces, and then let her eyes settle on Marcus, who stood just beside the stage, beaming like a proud father. "Thank you," she said, her voice perfectly even, betraying none of the seismic chaos within. "Thank you to the museum, to the board, and to all of you for this incredible honor." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Marcus is right," she continued, her gaze locked with his. "I have known him for a very long time, and he taught me a valuable lesson that night. So many years ago, he taught me that some structures are built on foundations so rotten, so compromised, that they don't deserve to be renovated. They need to be demolished, completely, so that something better, and stronger, and more honest can be built in their place." She gave the room her perfect, placid smile. To the audience, it was a powerful, if slightly cryptic, metaphor about urban renewal. But Marcus's smile faltered. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, and she saw the flicker of alarm in his sharp gray eyes. He understood. He knew exactly what she was saying. This wasn't an acceptance speech. It was a declaration of war. The silence in Elena's apartment was a physical presence, located in a sleek, minimalist tower of her own design overlooking the East River. The space was a reflection of her mind, ordered, precise, and devoid of clutter. Walls of glass framed the glittering tapestry of the city, but offered no comfort. The Vanguard Award sat on the polished concrete floor, catching the city lights, looking like a piece of alien debris. She had shed the midnight blue gown like a skin, leaving it pooled on the floor of her walk-in closet. Now, in simple black sweats, she stood before the window, her reflection a ghostly silhouette against the skyline she had helped to shape. The mask was gone. The composure she had worn like armor at the gala had been stripped away, leaving behind the raw, trembling nerve of her fury. His words echoed in the sterile quiet. A tragic miscalculation. He had unwrapped her soul's deepest wound and displayed it for sport. For 20 years. That night had been a sealed vault in her memory. She never spoke of it. She never allowed herself to linger on the images, the sounds, the crushing weight of her own perceived failure. Guilt had been her fuel, the silent, toxic engine that drove her to outwork, outthink, and outbuild everyone around her. She had thought that by achieving this level of success, by building a fortress of accomplishment around herself, she could finally entomb the ghost of that 19-year-old girl on the highway. Marcus had just proved her wrong. He had shown her that her fortress had a secret door, and he held the only key. He could walk in and rearrange the furniture of her pain whenever he pleased. And for what? To remind her of her place, to assert his dominance after she had bested him time and again in the professional arena. It was more than that. His cruelty felt ancient, deeply personal. It was the calculated sadism of a man who didn't just want to win. He wanted her to suffer. The rage that had crystallized within her at the gala was now a cold, clear certainty. This could not stand. The dynamic of their relationship, a 2-decade dance of professional rivalry, layered over a shared, unspoken trauma, had to end. He had escalated things to a place from which there was no return. He wanted to demolish her. Fine. She would give him the war he so clearly craved. But she would fight it on her terms, with her weapon's precision, strategy, and an absolute unwillingness to lose. She walked over to her desk, a single slab of brushed steel, and picked up her phone. Her hands were perfectly steady. She scrolled through her contacts, past the names of clients, contractors, and city officials, until she found the 3 she needed. 3 people who were not just colleagues, but extensions of her own will. Her real fortress was not made of glass and steel, but of loyalty. The first call was to a number that wasn't saved under a name, but a symbol, a chess knight. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered, thick with sleep. This better be a 5-alarm fire. Vance. It is, Julian. Just not the kind you're thinking of. Julian Croft had been her professor at Columbia, her first mentor, and the closest thing she had to a father, a brilliant, curmudgeonly architect of the old school. He had retired from building to teach, shaping 2 generations of designers. He had taught both her and Marcus. He was the one person who knew the full story of their history, the one person who had stood by her after the accident when whispers and rumors had followed her like a shadow. Marcus Thorne, she said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. I want to know everything. The deals he made in the shadows, the corners he cut, the skeletons he buried to build his empire. Everything you remember, everything you ever heard. I want the original blueprints to his soul. There was a pause on the other end. Then, the sound of a match striking, followed by a deep sigh of exhaled smoke. I was wondering when you'd finally get tired of letting that snake shed its skin on your doorstep. Julian grumbled. He was always rotten, even as a kid. Ambitious, but with no foundation. All facade. You know where to find me. Come in the morning. I'll start digging through the archives. Thank you, Julian. Don't thank me yet, he said. Taking on Marcus isn't architecture, it's demolition. Make sure you're standing clear of the blast zone. She hung up and immediately dialed the second number. This one belonged to Anya Sharma, a digital forensics prodigy Elena had hired 5 years ago to run her firm's cybersecurity. Anya operated in a world of code and data, a world of pure, unassailable logic. She could find a single misplaced comma in a terabyte of data. Anya, Elena said when the young woman answered, her voice crisp and alert, even at this late hour. I have a project for you. Off the books. Total discretion. Is it legal? Anya asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. Let's just say our objective is to enforce a contract that was never written down. Elena replied, I need you to build me a complete digital schematic of Marcus Thorne and Thorne Consolidated. Financials, communications, servers, offshore accounts, encrypted files. I want to see every wire, every circuit, every hidden back door. I'm not looking for rumors. I'm looking for data. Hard, quantifiable leverage. Marcus Thorne, Anya said. The name followed by the faint, rapid clicking of a keyboard. Big target. Significant digital footprint. Heavily armored. This will be fun. There was no moral judgment in Anya's voice. Only the thrill of a complex problem. Give me 72 hours for a preliminary threat assessment. I'll need a secure budget. You have it, Elena said, whatever it takes. The final call was to David Chen. David was the best PR strategist in New York, a master of narrative warfare. He could spin a disaster into a triumph and a triumph into a legend. He was expensive, ruthless, and loyal only to his clients, which made him perfect. David, she said, when his polished, media-trained voice came on the line, I'm about to enter a period of aggressive rebranding. Elena, he said smoothly, I saw your speech tonight. It's already trending. Demolition. Very bold. The blogs are eating it up. What's the play? The play is a controlled demolition. David. But I'm not the one being brought down. I need you to prepare for a storm. There's going to be blowback from Marcus. He'll come at me through the press, through whispers, through anonymous sources. I need you to build a firewall. And when the time is right, I need you to help me tell a story. The true story. A narrative battle with Marcus Thorne. David mused. That's the Super Bowl of PR. I'll need a full briefing. My office. 8 a.m. We'll start building the war room. After the third call, Elena set the phone down. The city lights outside no longer seemed mocking. They were just lights. Data points. A grid. The churning sea of emotion inside her had subsided, replaced by the familiar, comforting hum of a complex problem waiting to be solved. She picked up the Vanguard Award from the floor. It felt different now. Lighter. It wasn't a tombstone for her past anymore. It was a weapon. Marcus had intended to use the evening to remind her that he could hurt her, that he held a piece of her past hostage. But he had made a fatal error. He had reminded her that she was a builder, and a builder knows, better than anyone, that before you can create something new, you first have to clear the site. The next morning, the city was draped in a thin, gray drizzle that softened the hard edges of the skyline. Julian Croft's office was in a pre-war brownstone in the West Village, a dusty, cluttered sanctuary of architectural history that smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and bourbon. Books were stacked in precarious towers, blueprints curled in dusty cylinders in every corner, and models of buildings, some famous, some never built, stood like a miniature city on every available surface. It was the antithesis of Elena's own sterile aesthetic, and she found it deeply comforting. Julian sat behind a massive oak desk, a halo of smoke from his pipe hanging in the air around his head. He was a bear of a man, with a wild mane of white hair, and eyes that still held the sharp, appraising glint of a master craftsman. He pushed a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the desk toward Elena. Marcus Thorne, the early years, he announced, before he was a brand, when he was just another one of my arrogant, talented students who thought the rules of physics were optional. Elena opened the portfolio. Inside were sketches, design proposals, and critiques Julian had written in his spidery, decisive hand. She saw Marcus's early work grandiose, showy designs that prioritized a dramatic facade over structural integrity. Julian's notes were brutal, all surface, no soul. A building should serve its inhabitants, not the architect's ego. This isn't design, it's theatrical set dressing. He had talent, Julian said, correctly reading her thoughts. But he had no patience. He wanted the legacy without the labor. He saw architecture not as a craft, but as a shortcut to power. When he realized building things of value took time, he switched to what he was really good at: buying and selling, demolishing other people's work, and putting his name on the rubble. Elena's fingers traced a sketch of a community library Marcus had designed. It was surprisingly elegant, a flicker of the architect he might have been. He was close with Leo, she said, the words feeling heavy and strange. She rarely spoke her brother's name aloud. Julian's expression softened. He took a long pull from his pipe. He was, or he acted like he was. Leo was a light. He had that rare thing: pure, unvarnished creativity. People were drawn to it. Marcus was one of them. He orbited Leo, soaking up his energy. They were always talking about starting something together, a design firm that would blend Leo's artistic vision with Marcus's supposed business sense. A memory surfaced, hazy and distant. Leo, bubbling with excitement, talking about a revolutionary project he and Marcus were planning. She had dismissed it as teenage dreaming. Now, the memory felt different, weighted with a new significance. The night of the accident, Julian said, his voice low. Marcus changed after that. The ambition was still there, but it had curdled, became something harder, more rapacious. He dropped out of the architecture program a month later and used his family's money to get into real estate. It was as if Leo's death, unshackled him from any pretense of wanting to create something beautiful. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Be careful, Elena. A man who builds nothing has no problem with destruction. It's the only tool he knows how to use." Leaving Julian's office, Elena felt as though a blurry photograph was slowly coming into focus. Her next stop was a sterile, unmarked office building in the Flatiron district, the anonymous headquarters of Anya Sharma's digital forensics firm. The contrast with Julian's study was jarring. Anya's world was one of cool blue light, humming servers, and glass walls covered in flowing lines of code. Anya herself, dressed in a hoodie and jeans, looked more like a graduate student than a cyber sleuth capable of dismantling a corporate empire. She gestured for Elena to look at a vast array of monitors displaying a complex, spiderweb-like diagram. "The digital nervous system of Thorn Consolidated," Anya announced, her fingers flying across a keyboard. "Impressive firewalls, top-tier encryption. He spends a fortune on digital security, which tells me one thing. He has a lot to hide," Elena finished. "Precisely," Anya said with a thin smile. "I've started with the public filings, cross-referencing them with shell corporations registered in the usual tax havens, Cayman Islands, Delaware, Panama, standard rich guy stuff. But I found a pattern. He uses a very specific algorithm for setting up his holding companies. A sequence based on the Fibonacci series. It's an old-school cipher, almost arrogant. A little signature he leaves in the code. That's our way in." She pointed to a cluster of nodes on the diagram. "He has a major project pending approval from the city's planning commission. The Elysian Fields development in the Bronx. Luxury condos on a site that used to be a manufacturing plant. He bought the land for pennies on the dollar after it was declared a brownfield site. He'll have needed environmental impact reports to get the zoning changed," Elena said, her architect's mind immediately seeing the bureaucratic hurdles. "He did," Anya confirmed, pulling up a series of documents on one screen. 3 of them, all from a firm called Terra Verde Analytics, all giving the site a clean bill of health. The problem is, Terra Verde Analytics doesn't seem to exist outside of these reports. Its corporate registration is linked to one of those Fibonacci shell companies, and the address is a P.O. box in Wilmington. A cold thrill ran down Elena's spine. This was it. Not just a crack in the foundation, but a potential sinkhole. "Can you find the raw data? The original soil and water samples?" Elena asked. "That's the next step. It would have been stored on the engineering firm's servers. It's likely been wiped, but wiped is a relative term," Anya said, her eyes gleaming with the challenge. "Give me a few more days. I'll go digging." As Elena left Anya's office, her phone buzzed. It was a link from David Chen. The headline from a prominent real estate blog read, "Vanguard or Vulture. Elena Vance's demolition speech sparks controversy." The article was filled with anonymous quotes from industry insiders questioning her temperament, calling her acceptance speech erratic and unprofessional. One source suggested her recent success on the Callaway Tower project was due to ruthless, back-channel dealings. It was Marcus's opening salvo, just as she'd predicted. A smear campaign designed to frame her as unstable, to discredit her before she could even begin her attack. She called David immediately. "I saw it," he said, his voice calm and steady. "It's sloppy work. Predictable. I've already drafted a counter-narrative. We're going to leak an exclusive to the Times. A profile piece on you. We'll focus on your history of philanthropic work. The pro bono designs you've done for community shelters. We'll frame the demolition quote not as an attack, but as a passionate call for ethical urban development. We fight his shadows with sunlight." "He's trying to control the story," Elena said, watching the city rush past from the back of her car. "Then we'll write a better one," David replied, He's playing checkers. We, Elena, are going to play chess. Over the next few weeks, the silent war escalated. David's PR campaign worked brilliantly, painting Elena as a principled visionary. Articles appeared praising her commitment to sustainable design and community-focused architecture. Simultaneously, Anya continued her digital excavation. Burrowing deeper into Thorne's network, she found more shell companies, more questionable transactions, a pattern of buying distressed properties through anonymous entities, and then selling them to his own company at an inflated price. It was a classic self-dealing scheme, but masterfully hidden behind layers of corporate misdirection. Elena, meanwhile, began her own line of attack. Armed with the list of properties Anya had flagged, she started visiting the sites. In a dusty municipal archive in the Bronx, she pulled the original survey maps for the Elysian Fields property. There, in the faded ink of a 50-year-old document, she found a notation the Terra Verde reports had conveniently omitted. The site had once housed a chemical processing plant, one notorious for dumping industrial solvents. She also began her financial assault, quietly, through a series of blind trusts set up by her financial advisors. She started buying up shares of Thorne Consolidated. The stock was stable, a blue-chip behemoth, but she bought small, steady blocks, never enough to trigger an SEC alert. It was a slow, expensive process, but it was necessary for the final act. One evening, while sifting through a box of old university files Julian had given her, she found a small, faded photograph tucked inside a textbook. It was from a field trip, a group of students standing on a windswept beach, squinting into the sun. In the foreground was Leo, his arm slung around a younger, less polished Elena. He was laughing. Her heart ached at the sight of him. But it was the background that caught her eye. Standing slightly apart from the group was a young Marcus Thorne. He wasn't smiling. He was watching her, and Leo, his expression unreadable. On his hand, catching the light, was a distinctive silver ring, shaped like an Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail. It was the same ring he wore to this day, a symbol of eternity, of cycles, of inescapable loops. The image was deeply unsettling. He had always been there, in the background, watching. The breakthrough came on a Thursday night. Elena was in her studio, sketching ideas for a new museum wing, when a priority notification flashed on her screen from Anya. It was a single line of text: "I'm in." She immediately initiated a secure video call. Anya's face appeared, tired but electric with triumph. The Terra Verde servers were a dead end, wiped clean and physically destroyed. She explained, "But people are lazy. They have old habits." Before Thorne was Thorne Consolidated. It was a smaller firm called Thorne Development Group. I found a ghost server of theirs in an old data center in New Jersey that was never properly decommissioned. A digital time capsule. And on it, I found gold. A file appeared on Elena's screen. It was a scanned copy of a police report, the official report from the night of Leo's accident. Elena's breath hitched. Her blood ran cold. "The report is mostly what you'd expect," Anya said, her voice gentle. "Official finding was accidental, caused by hazardous road conditions and potential mechanical failure. But Marcus Thorne was listed as the primary witness, and he gave a statement." Anya highlighted a section of the text. Elena read Marcus's words. 20 years old, but as sharp as broken glass. He described Elena as driving aggressively, of taking the curve far too fast. He used the word reckless 3 times. His statement was a subtle but clear indictment of her driving, a narrative that painted her as the sole agent of the tragedy. It was a lie, a carefully constructed one. "That's not the gold, Elena," Anya said softly. "This is—" Another file opened. It wasn't a document. It was a personal audio log, recorded on a microcassette, and later digitized. The file name was simply MT Thoughts. The date was 2 days after Leo's funeral. Elena clicked play. Marcus's voice filled the room. Younger, rawer, but unmistakably his. It was not the voice of a grieving friend. It was the sound of pure, undiluted rage. She ruined it. The recording began, the audio crackling with age. She ruined everything. That project, Leo's project, it was perfect. The funding was in place. His father was going to back us. It was my ticket out. My way to finally show my own father I didn't need his money. And she, with her careless, stupid, tragic miscalculation, she drove it right into a tree. She didn't just kill him. She killed my future. He was the talent. I was the business. Without him, I'm nothing. Just another rich kid with a half-baked portfolio. She took it all from me. And she gets to walk away. She gets to go on and build her own life on the wreckage of mine. No. No. That cannot happen. A debt has been incurred, and a debt must be paid. She will build nothing. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure of it. I will be the ghost in her machine, the structural flaw in every one of her designs. She will pay for what she took from me, one brick at a time. The recording ended. Elena sat in stunned silence, the hum of the servers in her apartment the only sound. The world had just tilted on its axis. This wasn't about corporate rivalry. It wasn't about a bruised ego over the Callaway Tower. It had never been. His 2-decade campaign of slights, of obstacles, of psychological warfare. It was all revenge. A twisted, long-game vendetta born not of grief for her brother, but of rage for his own lost opportunity. He didn't blame her for Leo's death. He blamed her for derailing his own ambition. He saw her success not as her own achievement, but as a theft from his own future. The guilt she had carried for 20 years evaporated in an instant, replaced by the white-hot clarity of understanding. She was not a haunted woman paying a penance. She was the target of a meticulous, lifelong obsession. She looked at the complex web of financial data Anya had mapped on her screen. She looked at the falsified environmental reports. She looked at the shares of his company she now secretly controlled. "Anya," Elena said, her voice dangerously quiet, "find me the name of every board member, every major investor, and every journalist who will be at the Thorne Consolidated annual shareholder meeting." The game had changed. She wasn't just exposing a corrupt developer anymore. She was dismantling a monster of her own making, a ghost that had haunted her for far too long. She wasn't just going to clear the site. She was going to salt the earth. The air in the main conference room of Thorne Consolidated's headquarters was a carefully calibrated 68 degrees. Cold and still. The room was a monument to Marcus's aesthetic, a symphony of black marble, chrome, and smoked glass, presided over by a monolithic mahogany table that could seat 30. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, a kingdom he believed he owned. Today, this sterile sanctuary was a theater of war. It was the annual shareholder meeting, and the room was packed with the weight of old money and new power. Board members, institutional investors, and a curated selection of financial journalists sat with their leather-bound reports, their faces impassive masks of capitalist concern. The entire event was being live-streamed, a testament to Marcus's belief in his own untouchable transparency. He stood at the head of the table, the picture of confident command. He delivered a glowing report on the company's quarterly earnings, his baritone voice resonating with the comforting cadence of inevitable success. He spoke of growth, of acquisitions, of a future dominated by the Thorne logo. He was in his element, a king addressing his court. Elena watched him from a seat in the second row, a small, quiet shark in a tank of whales. She was not on the agenda. Her block of shares, acquired through a labyrinth of trusts, registered her simply as the Vance Equity Group, an anonymous entity no one had bothered to investigate. She was an observer, a ghost at the feast, waiting for her moment. David Chen was in a media suite down the hall, ready to amplify the fallout. Anya was patched into the room's audiovisual system, a digital god in the machine. Marcus concluded his presentation with a flourish. Speaking of his crowning achievement, the Elysian Fields development, "It will be a new paradigm for luxury living," he declared. "A beacon of progress for a forgotten corner of our city." A slide appeared on the massive screen behind him, a glossy, computer-generated rendering of gleaming towers set in lush, park-like grounds. It was a beautiful lie. "And now," the board chairman said, "we'll open the floor for questions from our shareholders." A few softball questions were lobbed and expertly returned by Marcus. Then, a hand was raised in the second row, a woman in a simple, dark gray suit. The chairman squinted, not recognizing her. "Yes, please state your name for the record." Elena rose. A low murmur rippled through the room. Heads turned. Marcus, who had been smiling benevolently, froze. The smile didn't drop. It seemed to shatter on his face, leaving a brittle, transparent mask. "Elena Vance," she said, her voice clear and calm, carrying easily through the silent room, representing the Vance Equity Group. The shock in the room was palpable. Marcus recovered quickly, his expression hardening into a mask of cold fury. He understood immediately that this was not a social call. "Ms. Vance," the chairman said, flustered, "this is a surprise. Do you have a question regarding the quarterly report?" "I do," Elena said, walking slowly toward the front of the room. She held a small tablet in her hand. "My question is for Mr. Thorne. It concerns the Elysian Fields project. You called it a beacon of progress. I'd like to discuss the foundation upon which that beacon is being built." She nodded to an unseen cue. Anya, from miles away, seized control of the presentation screen. The glossy rendering of Elysian Fields vanished, replaced by a scanned image of a 50-year-old survey map, the one Elena had found in the Bronx Municipal Archive. A small, faded notation was circled in red. "This is the original site survey from 1973, Elena explained, her tone conversational, as if she were leading a university lecture. "This notation, omitted from every environmental report submitted by your firm, indicates the presence of a chemical processing plant, specifically one that was later fined by the EPA for illegal dumping of tetrachloroethylene, a known carcinogen." The murmurs in the room grew louder. The journalists began typing furiously on their laptops. Marcus's face had become a thundercloud. "This is an old, irrelevant document," he snapped. "We commissioned 3 independent and exhaustive environmental studies that found the site to be perfectly safe." "Ah, yes, Terra Verde Analytics," Elena said smoothly. The screen behind her changed again, now displaying a complex flowchart of shell corporations, all originating from a single point Thorne Consolidated and flowing to a single, tiny box labeled Terra Verde Analytics. A firm with no employees, no physical address, and a corporate registration that leads back to a holding company you yourself own. It wasn't an independent analysis. Marcus, it was a puppet show. You weren't just the client. You were the ventriloquist. A gasp went through the room. This was no longer a question. It was an execution. "These are baseless accusations," Marcus thundered, his voice losing its polished edge. "Slanderous lies from a bitter competitor." "It's not a lie if it's data," Elena countered. The screen shifted again. displaying columns of figures financial transfers from Thorne's offshore accounts to the Cayman Islands entity that owned Terra Verde. And then, back to a private account controlled by Marcus. Anya had found the full money trail. It was undeniable proof of fraud, money laundering, and a massive public endangerment scheme. The room was in chaos. Board members were whispering frantically to their lawyers. Investors were staring at the screen, their faces ashen as they calculated the potential losses. The lawsuits, the stock price plummeting in real time. Elena let the data hang in the air. A death sentence written in numbers. She had him. He was cornered, exposed, his empire crumbling around him on a live global feed. She had expected him to collapse, to deny, to rage. She did not expect him to smile. It was a cold, reptilian smile. "Impressive," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously calm level. "Truly, a masterful presentation. You always were good at finding the structural flaws." He picked up his own tablet from the table. "But you see, Elena, you aren't the only one who does their homework. You seem to believe this is a battle of ethics, of right and wrong. But we're not in a lecture hall. We're in the real world. And in the real world, it's always about leverage." He tapped his screen. The data on the main monitor was wiped, replaced by a new document. It was a bank statement from 25 years ago. It showed a series of deposits into a personal account belonging to a Mr. Julian Croft. The deposits were from a construction company that had won a major city contract Julian had helped oversee as part of a pro bono advisory committee. "This," Marcus announced to the silent room, "is evidence of a kickback scheme. A beloved architectural mentor, a pillar of integrity, taking bribes. A story like this would not only end his career and his pension, it would likely send an old man to prison. A tragic end to a storied life." Elena's blood ran cold. She felt the floor drop out from beneath her. Julian. He had gone after Julian. "I have a full dossier," Marcus continued, his eyes locked on Elena's, full of triumphant malice. Affidavits, more bank records, all ready to be sent to the district attorney and, of course, the New York Times. But perhaps it doesn't have to be. Perhaps a mistake has been made here today. An overzealous shareholder, perhaps, who has misinterpreted some complex financial data. He presented his choice to her, a public crucifixion. "So, Miss Vance has a decision to make," he said. "The personification of magnanimous evil. She can continue with this character assassination, and, in doing so, utterly destroy the life and legacy of the one man who has always stood by her. The man who saved her career after her own tragic miscalculations. Or, she can retract her baseless claims, apologize to this board for her error, and we can all move on. The choice is hers." The cameras were all on her. The world was watching. He had presented her with an impossible choice, her justice or her mentor's life. He had found her one remaining vulnerability, her loyalty, and he was putting a knife to its throat. For a single, agonizing moment, she saw no way out. He had built the perfect trap. Then she remembered the first lesson Julian had ever taught her. Never admire a structure for its beauty alone. Understand its foundations. Test its load-bearing walls. Find its breaking point. Marcus thought he had built an unbreakable cage, but he had made a fatal miscalculation. He had assumed she hadn't prepared for this. Elena took a deep breath, her composure absolute. She looked not at Marcus, but at the board. "Mr. Thorne is right," she said, her voice steady. "It is about leverage, and he has presented what appears to be a powerful piece of it." She paused, letting the tension ratchet to an unbearable level. which is why I felt it was my ethical duty to provide Mr. Croft with a summary of my findings last week. I warned him that a desperate man might resort to desperate measures, including blackmailing an innocent party. On the screen, a new video file appeared. It was a recording of a sworn deposition, dated 3 days ago. Julian Croft sat in a lawyer's office, looking directly into the camera. "My name is Julian Croft." His voice, firm and resolute, filled the room. 25 years ago, I accepted what I foolishly considered a gift from a contractor. It was a moral failure, one I have regretted my entire life. I was never a public official and had no direct authority, but it was a profound error in judgment. In light of the possibility that this past mistake could be used to shield a far greater crime from coming to light, I have, of my own volition, provided a full and voluntary confession of this matter to the district attorney's office. The video ended. Elena turned back to Marcus. The color had drained from his face. He looked like a man who had just watched his last escape route crumble into dust. "And as for Mr. Thorne's dossier," Elena continued, coolly, "Anya, would you please show them the metadata analysis?" The screen changed one last time. It showed a forensics report. The documents Marcus had threatened to leak, the affidavits, the fabricated bank records, had all been created on a Thorne consolidated server. The creation timestamp on every file was less than 48 hours old. "Your blackmail is as fraudulent as your environmental reports." "Marcus," Elena said, her voice dropping the final hammer blow, "you didn't just try to bury a crime. You tried to frame an innocent man to do it." It was over. The room erupted, not into chaos, but into a stunned, tomb-like silence. The financial and legal repercussions were absolute, undeniable. At that moment, the doors to the conference room swung open. 2 uniformed police officers and 2 plainclothed detectives from the DA's office entered, their expressions grim and professional. David Chen had made the call the second Anya confirmed Julian's video had played. One of the detectives approached the head of the table. "Marcus Thorne," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest for corporate fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to endanger the public." Marcus stared at Elena, his face a canvas of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. The mask was gone. The titan of industry was gone. All that was left was the bitter, entitled boy from the audio recording. The boy who believed his future had been stolen. "You," he whispered, the single word dripping with 20 years of venom. Elena met his gaze, her own eyes clear of hatred, of anger, of anything but a quiet, final finality. "It's over. Marcus," she said, "the demolition is complete." As the detectives cuffed him and led him away, past the flashing cameras of the journalists who were now documenting the most spectacular corporate implosion in a decade, Elena stood perfectly still. She felt no triumph, no elation, only the clean, quiet, and profound relief of a great weight being lifted. She had not just defeated a man. She had exorcised a ghost. The weeks that followed the shareholder meeting were a media maelstrom. The downfall of Marcus Thorne was a feeding frenzy. News reports chronicled his arrest, the immediate freezing of his assets, and the catastrophic collapse of Thorne Consolidated stock price. The company, hollowed out by its founder's corruption, filed for bankruptcy within a month. The name that had been synonymous with power was now a shorthand for disgrace. Elena watched it all from a distance, insulated by David Chen's brilliant PR strategy. He had framed her not as a vindictive corporate raider, but as a courageous whistleblower who had risked everything to expose a massive public danger. She gave one exclusive interview, a calm, factual retelling of the events, and then retreated from the spotlight, leaving the narrative to run its course. Anya Sharma became a minor celebrity in cybersecurity circles. Her takedown of Thorne's digital fortress, a case study in ethical hacking. She was poached by a global tech firm for a salary that made Elena's budget for her seem quaint. But she promised to always be on call. Julian Croft. His name cleared and his integrity affirmed by his preemptive confession, was celebrated as a hero. The district attorney, seeing his proactive honesty and the minor nature of his decades-old infraction, declined to press charges. Columbia University gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award of his own. He and Elena met for a quiet drink at his favorite old bar in the village, the kind of place that smelled of wood polish and history. "I knew you had it in you," he said, raising his glass of bourbon to her. "You build things to last." "Elena, that was always your strength." He never understood that. His whole life was a facade, waiting to collapse. "He wouldn't have been able to touch you if I hadn't pushed him," she said, a lingering trace of guilt in her voice. "Nonsense," Julian countered, his voice firm. "A lie is a lie. A truth is a truth. You forced the issue. You held a light up in a dark room. Never apologize for that." The conversation moved on. To new designs. To the future. The ghost of Marcus Thorne had finally been laid to rest. 6 months passed. The chill of autumn gave way to the deep cold of winter. And then the tentative promise of spring. The wreckage of Thorne Consolidated was sold off in pieces. The Elysian Fields property, now the site of a massive, federally mandated environmental cleanup, was seized by the city. One bright, clear morning in May, Elena stood on that very piece of land in the Bronx. The air smelled of damp earth and new beginnings. The last vestiges of the contaminated soil were being carted away. Before her, architects and engineers from her firm were taking new surveys. She had won the bid. The city had awarded her the contract to develop the site, not with luxury condos, but with her vision. She unrolled a set of blueprints on the hood of her car. The plans showed a striking, light-filled building surrounded by green spaces, sports fields, and public gardens. The title on the plans read, "The Leo Vance Memorial Youth Center for Arts and Design." It would be a state-of-the-art community hub, offering free programs in architecture, poetry, painting, and music for underprivileged youth, a place for them to build their own futures. She was using her restored power not for vengeance, but to create a legacy of hope on the poisoned ground of Marcus's greed. She was finally building something for Leo. As she stood there, watching her team work, a courier on a bicycle pulled up beside her. Elena Vance. "Yes," she said, surprised. He handed her a padded envelope. "This is for you." She opened it, puzzled. Inside was a small, worn leather journal and a note. The note was from a distant cousin of her mother's, a woman she hadn't seen in years. "Dearest Elena," it read, "I was cleaning out my attic and found this box of your mother's old things. This was inside. I believe it belonged to your brother. I thought you should have it." Her hands trembled as she held the journal. It was Leo's. She had thought all of his things were lost. She sat on a low concrete barrier, the sounds of construction fading into the background, and opened it. His familiar, sprawling handwriting filled the pages with terrible poems, funny observations, and sketches of impossible buildings. She flipped to the last entry. The date was from the day of the accident. "She won't let me drive." It began, which is probably for the best. "The brake line is still feeling soft. I tried to patch it myself yesterday, but I don't think it held. I don't want to tell her and worry her. She worries about everything. I'll get it to a real mechanic on Monday. Have to make sure the car is perfect for our road trip this summer." Marcus is being weird, so intense about this project idea. He keeps calling it our future, but it feels more like his future. I don't know. I'm more excited about the thing Elena and I talked about. A small studio. Just the two of us. She'll do the buildings. I'll do the words. Vance and Vance. It has a nice ring to it. She thinks it's just a dream, but I think we can do it. She can do anything. Elena closed the journal, pressing it to her chest. Tears she hadn't shed in 20 years streamed down her face. They were not tears of grief, but of release. It wasn't her fault. It had never been her fault. The miscalculation was his. The guilt she had carried. The monstrous weight that had shaped her entire adult life. Was a phantom. A lie she had told herself. Echoed back by a man who used her pain for his own purposes. She looked up, her vision blurred by tears. At the blue sky above the construction site. She saw the cranes moving, the foundations being laid. She was not just destroying the old, but building something new and true in its place. The final, personal grace note had arrived, providing a closure deeper than any courtroom victory. She was free, the architect of her own life, at last, ready to build on a clean, solid foundation